Hi, thanks for stopping by. I wanted to share a little story time with you guys today. And this story is more on the topic of treating the janitor with the same consideration and respect as you would the CEO. Or also, how they say, always pay attention to how someone treats their waiter. Um, Now, this story in particular was about 25 to 30 years ago. And at that time, I was already a single mom and I had a couple of jobs. And my second job, I was a server at a restaurant here in town. And once I became a mom, I pretty much lost touch with everyone that I grew up with. Life went on, we became parents, we moved on. But on this particular night, this table had come in and was sat in my section, and I believe there was about probably 8 to 10 people at this table, so it was like an 8 or 10 top. And I recognized right away when I went to get their drink orders that one of the customers was someone I had gone to school with. It was a young lady that was a classmate of mine. We were never like really close, but we were always decent to each other, and always had respect for her. And so I said, "Hi, how are you doing?" and so on. And before that night, when I say everyone lost touch and went their separate ways and started building their lives, I knew that she had gotten married and pregnant around the same time that I had gotten pregnant with my oldest child, and that was that. That was all I knew. I didn't really know the man that she married, but on this night, just because I'd seen them together when we were younger, I was able to recognize him in the group as her husband. So everyone was seated at the table, and I believe when they first sat down, he was seated beside her. But at some point, while I was taking the drink orders, and I'm going to tell you right now, all servers hate whenever you're seated and they start taking your order and then you start moving around. But anyway, so it was pretty noticeable because everyone was on separate checks, and I had to kind of keep up with who's on whose check and so on. But anyway, her husband at one point had moved from being seated by her to being seated across from two females that I could tell were probably friends and going out together to meet up with this group of people. And it seemed that everyone was coming out, getting some food, and maybe about to have a night out. So over the course of their dinner and me taking their orders and so on, I kind of got this sense that this man, her husband, really had more of an eye for those two single ladies. It was pretty clear to me throughout my time at their table, just taking orders, delivering food, and so on, and drinks, that he was pretty enamored with these two females. And those two females, I could tell, were kind of, I don't know if they were flattered, but they were entertained by it. And the young woman that I knew from all those years ago was seated almost at the other end of the table. But I could tell by the way um, he was when I would take their drink orders or when I would ask for their food orders. He was very dismissive and also just didn't really want to be interrupted or even stop what he was doing to place an order. He was just so in tune to these two females. And throughout the course of their time there, anytime that I was at the table, that's what was observed. And as the table, they got their checks, they went on. It was clear to me at that point that um, this man, this young woman's husband, was less concerned with his wife having a good time as much as he was concerned with him having a good time and putting on a face for these females. So that was that. Many years passed. Probably, I'm not sure, plenty of years, at least 15 years had passed. And we live in a small community. I almost don't want to say that. And I would pass their, I would pass them, have short interactions with them over time, just, being in the same place or different events, and I would see one of them or both if it was like a kids function. And it was clear that they had since separated and divorced, because he was then remarried, which later I found out he was remarried to one of the women, not the women at the table, but he was remarried to a mistress that he had during his first marriage to the young woman that I knew. So it was clear to me they had separated, divorced, and moved on, and that he had remarried. He seemed happy in his new marriage, and his new wife seemed happy. It wasn't anything obvious, and to be honest, I wouldn't have known otherwise. So um, that's something I picked up on through just the years that I would run into them from time to time. So um, again, about 15 years from the date of that restaurant uh, dinner, um, I was out with some girlfriends, and just having a girls' night, and just just having a girls' night. But I had ran into him, and just politely, just because we knew each other through the community, had said, "Hey, like, how are you? How's your wife? Where's your wife?" And because I'm a girl's girl, I'm a woman's woman, and I'm not one who's going to, unless I know this person very well, I'm not going to have a lot of conversation with a man in that setting when I know he's married, without, um, asking about his wife, or if his wife's there, definitely saying hello and so on. To me, it's just a respect thing for women. As I asked him, "Oh, where's your wife?" Thinking she was there, I was just going to say hi, and just keep going, and let it be that short conversation. Well, he went on to tell me that he was currently going through a divorce, that she had asked for a divorce. And my thoughts on that was like, oh, okay. And for one, we don't really know each other that well. But I asked, he told me, and he told me, and I believe I said something to the sense of, "I'm so sorry, maybe it's just a rough patch, just, hang in there." He just seemed so upset and sad about it. So it seemed as though he wanted to get that off his chest. So I just tried to reassure him and told him it's going to be okay, and so on and so on. Well, of course, I'm sitting there with my girlfriends, and there were parts of that conversation, and it was less than a 10-minute conversation that he was able to tell me this information in. And my girlfriend or two had commented or kind of included themselves in the conversation too, from one point or another. And that was that. Life went on. I had a good time with my girlfriends, and that was that. Well, probably about 3 to 4 weeks after that night, I get a call from one of my girlfriends who was with me that night, that we ran into this man. And she said, and I'm not gonna use real names, but just to give him a name, I'm gonna call him John. And she said, my girlfriend said to me, "Hey, I ran into that guy John." And I said, "John?" And she said, "The one we saw however long ago." I was like, "Oh yeah." And she said he was asking all about you. And my girlfriend was calling to tell me that she had given him my phone number. And before I attack my girlfriend or anyone else does, I was at a point in life at that time frame where I had been single for several years, and I had finally opened myself up to try to start dating again. And I had just ended kind of I'm going to call it a dud relationship. It was just like a guy I dated briefly, and it just wasn't a match. It didn't work out. So she knew that I was open to dating, and the man, he was not an unattractive man. But what she didn't know is some of the history that I've known about him. And I'll also say to that, um, people can change, people can grow, people can learn, and I wasn't really holding him to that, but I was a little bit offended, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I was that waitress, I was that server that was quickly dismissed and treated as an inconvenience when just being there to do my job and serve their table. And so it was a little odd that here we are all those years later, and this man is now, after ending his second marriage, um, is showing some interest in me. And my girlfriend also did not know any of that. So she called to tell me that she had given him my phone number and that he'd be calling. So I think I kind of let her know I wasn't too happy about that. That wasn't something I would be interested in. And I didn't give her all the details, but she was like, oh no, like, I'm sorry, and so on. So probably within the hour of my girlfriend's phone call, I get a phone call. It was him. And he said, hey, it's John, first name only. And of course, he didn't know my girlfriend had just called me. And I wasn't going to let him think for a second that he was just the only John I knew that may be calling my phone. So I just said, John? Like, I'm sorry. And then he went on to say, John so and so, and gave his last name. And I was like, oh, hey. And I just acted clueless, which a lot of females will can relate to that. But anyway, I just acted clueless. And he went on to tell me how he ran into my friend and started asking about me, and that she had given him my number. And I was like, oh, okay. And the really odd part about this is he had told me on that first phone call that since the day he had ran into me several weeks prior, 3 to 4 weeks prior, when I was out with my girlfriends, that he just couldn't stop thinking about me. And that every time he would get upset or depressed about his current pending divorce, that he would just think about me, and life would feel better. Okay. So, of course, being an empath and a people pleaser, that kind of triggered something in me. Suddenly, I felt a little responsible, I guess, for his feelings, or maybe for him to not, I don't know, waste away in the sad parts of where his life was at that moment, because I was his glimmering light of hope. And I'd never given anything that would appeal to him, or show interest or anything like that. But and I guess a little part of me was a little flattered, but also a little taken back. Like, okay, I would never tell this story to him or anyone who knew him, and heaven forbid if anyone came across this story and could put it together, but I don't see why they would. But anyways, yes, I was a little flattered, but thinking also of how low and down and pure on in struggle mode I was all those years ago when I was waiting tables, and how belittling it felt to be dismissed by someone who's from my community, someone whose wife knew me, and whose wife always greeted me and was kind. And but it wasn't just that. It wasn't just about how you treat your waitress. It was about how he treated his wife. And again, I'm a woman's woman, and I'm an empath, and we've been through some things. A lot of us women have experienced those type of situations. So I really related to her in that moment, that night at the restaurant, and I had a little bit of disgust for him. And then all those years later, of course, when I found out that they had divorced and that he had moved on and married his mistress, it kind of was like a repeat observation, I guess you could say, for me. Um, I mean, we can always be wrong about someone at first impression, right? Um, but at second impression and everything thereafter, if the storyline kind of matches up with your first impression, um, you were probably right. And Lord knows I'm not in a position to judge or figure out who is what, or who deserves chances and so on. But it was very clear to me on that phone call that this wasn't something I was going to be down for. Not only did I find it very distasteful to treat his wife the way that he did that night in that restaurant, but also call me and just assume I knew who he was right off. And then, well, I'm going to call it love bombing. It wasn't no mention of love, but it was that whole, this wondrous idea he had of me that was just carrying him through, the difficult times. And I'm not making fun of anyone who's going through something like that, but it was almost as if he expected me to be his saving grace. Like I was going to be what pulled him out of his, low points and depression. And it put a lot of, for me and someone like me, who is very polite and kind and empathic and also a people pleaser, it internally it offended me, but externally I tried to be very passive about it and just like, oh, thanks, that's flattering, and I don't know how that conversation ended, but he did push to make sure it wasn't the only conversation we'd had. And I think I obliged just by saying, oh yeah, like you can call me anytime. I'm not even sure exactly, but he did. And I'm just going to stop there with this part of the story, just to kind of give that context of pay attention to how you treat your waiter, your server, the janitors, and the CEOs, and just tell you that no matter where someone is in life, it doesn't mean they're always going to be there. And no, I was no CEO or no supermodel or anyone that I would have even considered someone to have that much interest um, in that setting. But yeah, like we all go through things. Not life isn't 100% grand all the time. It doesn't matter what is shown on social media or what is presented out there or when we're out with the rest of the world. Like we all have those moments, and just be kind. Like be kind. Not only will it matter to that person, but it may affect or matter later in your own life as well. So I'm going to stop there. There's a little bit more to the story, not much. There was a little more details, and if you want to hear any of that, I'll make a second video and tag it in the end of this one. But anyway, just be kind. I hope you guys have a great day. You take care.